And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Cable. Chapters is the television show that profiles local authors, editors, and publishers in our community. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. We're delighted to have author and writer Laura Boggess with us here today on Chapters to talk about her books and her work. And Laura Boggess is the content editor at thehighcalling.org, and she blogs frequently at lauraboggess.com, where she shares stories about faith, family, and chasing after God. With a master's degree in clinical psychology, Laura works in medical rehabilitation and works at a medical rehabilitation hospital in West Virginia, where she resides currently with her husband Jeff and their two sons, Teddy and Jeffrey. And we're here to talk about her books today, Playdates with God, Brody's Story, Derek's Story, and the most recently released book that features one of her essays in it, The Beauty of Grace. And Laura Boggess is our guest today. And Laura, welcome to Chapters. So nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for asking me. It's my pleasure.
Well, my pleasure. Glad to have you here. So before we get into some of your books specifically, how did all this start for you in terms of writing and blogging and getting involved in becoming a writer?
Well, I think like most writers, I have been a writer most of my life. When I was younger, I always kept a journal, and that was a way to process through life and kind of get you through those teenage angsty years. And when I decided on a career path, I followed after my first love, which was psychology, and it wasn't until after I had my children that I was staying home with my boys and just had some extra time while they were taking their naps. And I started blogging back in 2007, and it grew into a really special way of expressing myself and growing my craft, and the books came a little bit later.
I wanted to ask you about that idea of blogging, because we've talked to a lot of writers who talk about blogging and that process. How does that work for you in terms of how often do you blog, and how has blogging tied into your books in terms of getting the word out about the books and getting reactions and comments and feedback from readers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Blogging has a lot of people, there's a lot of talk right now that blogging is dead. It has sort of met and passed its heyday, I think. Blogging for me is still, it's a discipline. I blog about 3 times a week, usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes I'll do it on the weekend too if I have a little extra time. But the way it grew for me was I developed a community of readers, and you become very close. It sounds kind of strange, but when you're communicating through the written word, it's very easy to reveal much more of yourself much more quickly. A lot of the guard is down, and it's a very intimate way to communicate. So a lot of my blog readers became very close friends. I've met a lot of them in person now, which is another story, but my community grew through my blog, and I got involved with The High Calling through my blog. The High Calling is an online organization that's run by the Butt Family Foundation, which if you've ever been down to Texas, there are a series of grocery stores called the HEB grocery stores, and that's the Butt Family Foundation that runs those. And they have a lot of wonderful programs. They own a foundation camp, a free camp for kids, and a retreat center in the Hill Country in Texas. And The High Calling is one of their programs. So it's an online organization that tries to get the message out that God cares about the work that we do, no matter if that is in the cubicle or at home changing diapers, doing the laundry, or on Wall Street, that God cares about the daily tasks that we all do. So I got involved with The High Calling, doing a book club for them, and met a lot of other writers, And you know what they say, if you want to run fast, you run with the fast girls. And so I was hanging out with a lot of really talented writers and editors and people who loved ideas and loved the written word. And it really was challenging, and I grew through that association. So that was where my writing started to develop, my blogging and the writing that I did for the High Calling grew into a bigger thing, not by any plan, just sort of an organic process, which the internet has a funny way of doing that.
I wanted to ask you about that too, also about the connections that you make with your bloggers and how that ties into, as you mentioned, the highcalling.org. Did you find that at first you and your bloggers or the readers you were communicating with on your blog wanted to talk about writing, and as you got to know each other better, the conversation shifted to children and family and responsibilities, and in terms of forging that relationship with your readers? Did you find that to be true with your blog?
I think in a lot of ways that is true. My original population that I interacted with, we started out doing Bible studies together online, and there were a lot of mommy bloggers on there talking. They were deep in the trenches of the toddler days, and that was where I started. And when I moved into the High Calling, it became more of a writer population. So I sort of had two different groups of folks I was interacting with, and I'm still friends with a lot of those same people.
I wanted to ask you also about what have you learned as a writer, as a person, through the blogging experience, in terms of sharing some of those experiences with other people. Did you find that, as with any experience with people, that sometimes you have more in common or less in common with certain people depending on their circumstances? Was that true for you as you started blogging and interacting?
The internet is a funny place. You can present yourself to be anything. And I think in the early days of blogging, that's what it was. We were putting ourselves out there sort of as an example, and people were blogging about a lot of things that were, I don't want to say shallow, but it wasn't authentic at first, because you're trying to share ways and things that you do that can help other people. And as time went on, that type of storytelling lost its appeal to a lot of people, and the more repeated interactions you have with the same people, the more people were longing for authenticity and transparency. And I think real stories from real life became the norm for most bloggers. And what we found is that we've all got these common areas in our life. We all have challenges and struggles that we deal with. So there's always that common ground of just the human condition. And I think that is the place that most of us try to write from on our blogs these days. So.
Interesting. That's fantastic to hear that the blog process is so successful for you, because some of our writers have talked about how it's an option for them, or they're encouraged to do it, but they don't really like it. They don't get much feedback. So that's great to hear that it's been successful for you. That's
well, that was
fantastic.
where I started.
Yeah.
So I think of myself more as a blogger than a writer. I don't want to say a real writer, but a writer of books. In fact, I would say that my books happened by accident.
Well, I wanted to ask you about one of those books too, because it was a terrific story, and that's Brody's story. There's two books in that series. Brody's story came first, Derek's story came second. And really in Brody's story, when we read that book, we're learning about Brody and his parents, who are not having the best of relationships, and sort of things are falling apart. But one of the things that you put in that book is a tiny little hummingbird, and I hope I've pronounced this correctly. Cleo, is that correct, Cleo? Tell us about Cleo, who is the tiny hummingbird, And what kind of relationship does he have with Brody that helps him through this transition that his family's going through?
Cleo is the common thread in that series. It's a little bird who was present in the Garden of Eden when the serpent told Eve the lie and convinced her to eat the fruit. And as Cleo flew to tell the Lord what was happening, the serpent turned her to stone. And now she's passed down from generation to generation as a little guardian angel of sorts. Whenever she touches a heart, she becomes sort of a liaison between that person and God, and acts as a guardian angel. And for Brody, is a young girl whose parents are going through a divorce and is struggling through a lot of family dysfunction and a lot of issues that are common in West Virginia, parental alcoholism and divorce and poverty. And Cleo intervenes in a lot of ways to sort of make the path straight, to help forge a better way. So.
And through Cleo's help, when you read the story, Brody learns some things about himself and about life and about his family. Can you tell us a little bit about, without giving too much away, tell us a little bit about the transition that Brody kind of makes through his relationship with Cleo as time goes on?
Mm-hmm. When Brody's parents separate, she has to start a new life with her mother, and she makes some new friends who introduce her to church for the first time in her life, and she begins to question the existence of God and could this be true, and she begins to feel the stirrings in her heart that yes, there is someone who sees her and cares about her, and even though everything in her life seems to be falling apart, that provides a foundation for her to go on and find a good way.
Well, it's a terrific story that's got so many good themes, and as you mentioned, ties in really with what's going on in West Virginia and Appalachia today with our families. Unfortunately, the negative as well as the positive. So Brody's story came out first. How soon after Brody's story was Derek's story written, and how soon did it come out after Brody's story?
Brody's story was published in 2007 and Derek's story in 2010. It's sort of at the end of Brody's story, she passes the bird along to a boy in her school, and that's where Derek's story picks up. He now has the bird, and we move into his story.
So tell us a little bit about his story. What happens to Derek and his particular story with Cleo?
Derek is a young man whose parents are addicted to prescription pills, and they are selling medications out of their home. His mother overdoses and is put in the hospital, and his father disappears. And when he's in the hospital visiting his mother, he and his little sister are about to be put into foster care when he remembers that his mother has a family somewhere in West Virginia. And through some careful sleuthing, the social worker is able to locate his grandparents, and the two children move in with their grandparents, which is happens a lot in West Virginia. Through their grandparents, the kids are, for the first time in their lives, provided with a stable and loving environment. And we go with them through all the changes of that life and the desire for their parents to be made whole again too.
So some of those same themes from Brody's story kind of carry over to Derek's story, but just a little different in terms of the circumstances. What is Derek and Cleo's relationship like in that story that maybe is a little similar or different to the relationship that Cleo has with Brody in the first book?
Derek has a dream about Cleo in this book that leads him to make certain actions that clarify situations in his life, and open his eyes to some better choices for him. So, but otherwise, it's a similar. He carries her sort of as a good luck charm, and becomes very fond of her.
We mentioned a few moments ago that you have a master's degree in clinical psychology.
Yes.
How much of what you've experienced and dealt with over the years made its way into not just Brody's story and Derek's story, but your blogging and your writing? Do a lot of the things that you write about, themes and characters that you base your stories upon, come from those experiences as a clinical psychologist, or are they separate from what you experienced in the workplace?
A lot of Brody's story and Derek's story actually come from some of my life experiences. Growing up in West Virginia, substance abuse in family history, broken family, a lot of dysfunction. It seems to be, the older I grow, the more I learn that that dysfunction is the norm. None of us have a perfect family. I always thought, as I was growing up, that I wanted to work with teenagers and children because of what I experienced. But after I got my master's degree, it just turned out differently. I work with adults in the medical rehabilitation population, but a lot of the people that I see, their lives are touched by these same themes: addiction, brokenness, relationships that are damaged and aching and just wanting renewed and restored. So, my patients are a big source of inspiration for me.
Do you find that those families that are in this tumultuous situation, or people in a family that are going through a tumultuous time that maybe drag other family members into it, whether it's substance abuse, as you said, or poverty or things like that, do they see it as a problem, or is it something where they have coped and have dealt with it for so long that it becomes their new normal? Because we hear about this a lot, and we've had writers on our show that have written about those themes of substance abuse and divorce and broken homes. But you see it kind of both sides, as the writer and as the clinical psychologist. Do they adopt that as their new normal, or do they realize at certain points, hey, something in my family's not right?
Yeah. I think both. I think I've worked with people who have never known any other way. By the time the patients get to our unit, most, if they have a history of substance abuse that led to their injuries, because I work with brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, people who've had strokes and amputations and that kind of thing. And a lot of times substance abuse is involved in those traumatic situations. By the time they reach us, they've usually been weaned off whatever substances they've been dealing with, but they're having a lot of pain, and their pain medication is a big issue, and that's a very real situation that me and my colleagues have to deal with, is to help them figure out, when I go home, how am I going to live a better life and not abuse these substances. So it's a mixed picture, I think, in West Virginia. A lot of the people I work with are just ordinary people dealing with extraordinary circumstances who've never had substance abuse problems in their life. But for the individuals who have struggled with that, it tends to become a crutch and a coping mechanism. And part of my job is to help them find healthier ways to deal with that.
This leads me into your next book, which I really want to talk about, Playdates with God. But before we get into that, because one of the things that Playdates with God talks about is, this intimate relationship, or reestablishing an intimate relationship with God. But one last question on the patients that you work with. Do you find that those people in the depths of the substance abuse or the tumultuous problems that they're having within their lives and their families, do you find them talking about religion much? Do you find them saying things like, this is God's will? Do you find them more spiritual, or do you just find that it's across the board? You have some that are spiritual and religious, some that aren't. Is there a connection or a component of spirituality with those people that are battling those problems?
Well, in my work, I don't typically deal with the spiritual side of things. I have to be careful about that. But when a person has a spiritual experience in the midst of their recovery, it's usually an important focus in our therapy. And one thing I have noticed is those individuals seem to be able to cope a little better. They have a higher power to draw from, and they are able to see a purpose in their situation and look for what they're supposed to be learning. And so yes, I would say both, but it makes my job a little easier when they are a spiritual person.
I'm sure it does. Your book, which just came out not too long ago, Playdates with God, I think it came out in January of 2014, is that correct?
October.
October 2014. Playdates with God, having a childlike faith in a grown-up world. One of the themes that you write about in this book is that there is a process where, as time goes on and our lives go on, God tries to woo us back. Talk to us a little bit about what you mean by woo us back, and what are some things that go on for that process to happen?
Well, I think I'm mostly speaking from my personal experience. I went through a time in my spiritual life that felt extremely dry and rote and worn out, and I was doing all of the things that they tell us in church we're supposed to do. I was having my quiet time, I was doing my Bible study, going to church every Sunday, Sunday school, but it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. I was feeling far away from God, and it felt like I was just trying to grab and grab and grab, and it wasn't filling this need inside of me for that intimate relationship that I had experienced. I knew it was possible. I'd felt that before, but for some reason during this dark season, it was out of my reach. And I think that God does that sometimes. I think He the desert fathers and mothers called it the dark night of the soul, where it feels like God is hiding from you. And I think that is His way of encouraging us to eliminate all this extra stuff that gets in the way of drawing close to Him and being with Him. When church is too stressful, too demanding, when you're doing too much, when you're busy, when everything in life seems to be pulling out of you and nothing is feeding in, sometimes you just have to say, I'm done, and be quiet and be still and let God speak in those places, in those tender places.
And along those lines, I love a quote that you wrote on page 120 of your book, which really stood out to me. Regardless if you're religious, spiritual, or don't find that valuable, you comment in the bottom of the page there, when eyes are focused on some point far ahead, it's hard to see the beauty right beside you. And it seems like that no matter where we are in this journey of life, oftentimes we're so busy looking ahead to the next week, the next month, the next job duty, the next promotion, the next activity, whatever it may be, that we forget to kind of look to the left and look to the right and say, I need to be present in the now and enjoying what's going on right now. And that seems to pop up a lot in your book, the idea of not always looking far ahead, not always looking behind, but enjoying what's going on right now in your life.
Yeah, I think that is the secret to happiness, to find the holy in every moment. James Taylor had it right. The secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. I think we are a society that is driven by achievements and all the stuff out here. And we no sooner meet one goal when we're running after another one. We forget to enjoy the achievements right here, the time right here, this moment right now. What am I seeing? What am I smelling? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? And it doesn't take much to find beauty right where you are.
In our final moments with you today, Laura, I wanted you to briefly mention The Beauty of Grace, which is an anthology that came out in the early part of 2015. You have an essay in that collection. Tell us a little bit first about what's the thematic approach to the collection and what is your essay about?
It's a collection of stories that a bloggy friend of mine, we call them bloggy friends in the business, it's just a little bit of the lingo, Dawn Camp, put them together. She's a blogger and a photographer, and so she just curated several articles from some of her closest blog friends and paired it with some of her beautiful photography. And there are different themes in the book. My article is about a moment with my son when he was in middle school, when he was getting ready to go to I think it's the state band competition. And he was all dressed up, and we were waiting for the bus and to take him away from me. And I asked him if he was nervous, and he said no, that we'd practiced really hard, and he felt like he was ready. And as I watched them pull away, I realized that as adults, we lose that assurance so often. And he was much more confident of himself than I am in my daily tasks, in the things that I prepare for, that I practice, and I let uncertainty and fear creep in all too readily. And that is the theme of Playdates with God, to have the faith of a child, to have the eyes of a child, to see the wonder, but also the thing that a child has that we miss is they are so ready to admit their need, and they have no fear of opening themselves up and saying, I need your help. Mom, will you make my dinner? Mom, will you wash my clothes? Mom? But we so often are trying to put our best face forward for our peers that we don't like to admit our need. So children can teach us a lot.
Yes, they certainly can. Good and bad, certainly. And Laura, in our final moment with you, if anyone in our audience wants to get in contact with you or get copies of Playdates with God, of Derek's story, of Brody's story, or of the new anthology, The Beauty of Grace, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they find copies of your work?
Well, my website is lauraboggess.com. Playdates with God is available at all the online retailers. Empire Books has some copies. The Books A Million on Corridor G now has some. I'm getting ready to do a book signing at the Books A Million in the Town Center Mall on March 7th, so I'll be there. I'm working with the Books A Million in the Huntington Mall to get some of my books available there. The Christian bookstore in the mall also has some of my books. So they're available. If you can't find it, I would encourage you to ask your bookstore to order it. We try to encourage people to support their local bookstores before they move to the online retailers. So I'm sure that they would be happy to order any of these books if anyone was looking for them.
Fantastic. Well, I certainly hope our audience will do that, because I think they'll find there's a lot of good, not only writing and good stories here, but a lot of good thematic lessons that apply to all of us, no matter where we are at our stage in life. Blogger and author Laura Boggess, thank you so much for joining us here on Chapters today. It was a pleasure. We wish you all the best of luck with your writing, and we hope to have you back on the show sometime soon.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And finally, our episodes of Chapters each time here on Armstrong Cable are made possible by a lot of people who do work in front of the camera and behind the camera. And some of those folks that make our broadcasts possible each episode include the staff and management at Empire Books and News here at Pullman Square in Huntington. Many of the authors and publishers you've seen featured on the program have their works for sale here at Empire Books and News. So we encourage you to come down and check those out, or talk to Charlotte and her staff. If you have a particular book, author, or reading taste, they can help you get that taken care of right here at Empire Books and News. And if you've got a question, comment, or story suggestion about this chapter's program or any chapter's program that you've seen here on Armstrong Cable, we want to hear from you. You can send us an email to the address that pops up right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. We appreciate all the comments that we do receive. And if by chance you've missed a previous episode of Chapters, or you want to go back and check out an episode from previous weeks, previous months, and previous seasons, we've made that available to you as well through the Armstrong One Wire YouTube page. All you need to do is go to the address that's at the bottom of the screen here as well, www.youtube.com/ArmstrongOneWire, and there you can go back and watch previous episodes of Chapters. We've got over 10 hours of author, publisher, and editor interviews there for you. So if there's one you've missed or one you want to see again, you can check that out at the Armstrong One Wire page. And we know a lot of you have been doing that. We certainly appreciate not only you watching those episodes again, but also the comments and feedback that you leave behind on the YouTube page. So we appreciate that so much, and we hope you'll continue to check out those previous episodes of the show. Well, that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters. Please come again next time, and in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.